magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman, and today we're super excited to be recording here in Big Sky, Montana with our awesome guest, Kari Gras. So Kari, so excited that you're with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, and we are spending this whole season talking about intentional leadership. And so for those of you listening, just a couple quick reminders. The way we define leadership is it's a simple three-step thing. We notice something that could be better in the world. We make an intentional choice on how are we going to engage that? What are our options? What are we going to do? So an intentional choice. And then we actually follow through. We have the courage to act. So we notice, we make a choice, and then we act. And today we're really excited to talk about that. But reminder, there is a reflection guide at magicintheroom.com. You can go and download that and strongly encourage people to use that to really take some of the concepts and apply it internally. The more we lead ourselves, the better leaders we become for the people around us.
Yeah. Well, Kari, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. I've been getting to know you a little bit over the last several months, and you're part of the Big Sky community, even though you live a little bit outside of Big Sky, in a beautiful place right by Yellowstone National Park, right? West
Yes.
Yellowstone.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for making the drive in today and meeting with us early in the morning to record.
I love this. Yeah, thank you.
So Kari, tell us a little bit about your background. So you started Together Consulting. You're an HR consultant. You've been doing this for a long time, and long before I met you, your reputation had preceded you in this community. I had heard your name come up on many occasions, and I thought to myself, Kari sounds like somebody I need to meet. So we were together on a online Chamber of Commerce call meetup.
I totally remember that.
And I was like, that's that Kari Gras. I need to reach out and meet her. So we had coffee. We had virtual coffee.
We did have virtual coffee.
You were in Florida at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you learn? And
Yeah, thanks for that lead in. I got started in 2013 because
10
I
years
was
ago.
10 years ago.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. It's exciting to kind of realize where and where I am today.
Yeah.
And back in 2013, I became suddenly unemployed. Is a nice way of positive spin on certain circumstances occurred.
You found yourself facing an
Exactly.
There we go.
My perspective today
Sure.
is
it may not have felt that way at the time.
definitely did not feel that way at the time.
Right.
And, I realized that, through my experiences, I wanted to do certain things differently. And it was, kind of in that moment after picking up the pieces, building back my self-confidence a little bit, I started to talk to all of my friends in the community.
Yeah.
Who most of them are small business owners themselves. So there was this, I want to say maybe, curiosity that came from them of, oh, you're out on your own now? Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm trying to fill this job and I'm struggling finding someone who's qualified. Can you help me do a little recruiting? Well, absolutely, I can help you.
Yeah.
And then it spurred into, I really need, I have no employee handbook. My employees are doing whatever they want, whenever they want, and there are no rules. And I don't know if I'm firing people the right way. I don't know how to discipline or coach anyone.
Right.
Can you help me? And absolutely, I can help you. I can help you set up a full HR structure and write your handbook for you and do all of these things. And it blossomed.
Wow.
And it really just grew into, and I really had the intention in the beginning that I was just going to do this thing and it was just going to be me for a really long time. I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll be a consultant and it'll just keep me busy. And then I was teaching a class to this group of business owners. And I was talking about how wonderful it is to have employees and how, they can really help you go further in your business and grow your bottom line and just how wonderful it is.
Yeah.
And this individual said, well, how do you really know? You don't have employees.
Whoa.
How can you speak from that place?
Yeah.
And I thank them for saying that. I'm like, you're absolutely right. My only experience has been working in an organization. It wasn't my own organization.
Right.
So I thought about that and it stuck with me for a long time. And then I found myself in this place where I couldn't do all the work myself. If I really wanted to grow, I needed employees to help me.
Yeah.
So I placed an ad and manifested who I wanted, to help me and get these things started. And I found my first employee. Her name is Heather. We're still friends today. She's not still with the company, but yeah,
It's wonderful.
it's great.
Yeah. And you have a great team now, and they live in different places, right?
They do.
So it's a fully remote team.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually there are two now in Bozeman. There's another woman who lives up on the High Line, so kind of opposite end of Montana. And then I have another woman who's in Texas.
Okay.
And then I live part-time in Florida.
Yeah.
So we're kind of spread out now.
Yeah.
So working remotely in HR works.
It does. It does
Strangely enough,
work.
it can
we
work.
found a way.
That's
yes,
awesome.
I think we found a way.
Yeah. So obviously you had a lot of HR experience already. You didn't just strike out on your own starting an HR consulting firm without having some background. So tell us a little bit about what was your background? How did you get into HR work? And then we'll dig into a little bit why you wanted to do things differently from what you'd experienced.
Perfect. I got started while working for the Yellowstone Club, and I realized that I didn't want to continue working 70 hours a week, sometimes more.
Yeah.
There were weeks I worked 100 hours.
Wow.
I was sleeping on the floor in my office, not really leaving.
Yeah.
And I realized I moved to this beautiful Big Sky, Montana, to have a life and to enjoy the outdoors, to ski, to hike, to do all the amazing things, right? And at the time, I was going through some, personal shifts and really had the VP of operations at the time come to me and say, I'd built a team because at that time I was the children's director.
Okay.
And because that was my background, I got a degree in outdoor recreation.
Okay.
And so I was teaching environmental education, children's ski school, things like that. And what was interesting is, building this team and setting them up for success and so that they could, do what they needed to do their jobs. He came around and said, well, I really expect you to be here 70 hours a week. That's my expectation. If you're on salary, that's what I expect. And I had a little bit of a breakdown and I said, I can't work that much anymore.
Yeah.
I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years and I'm exhausted. And, we had some more conversations and negotiations and I finally said, then you need to find someone else. I just can't do it. I won't do it. So I went to the CFO and controller at the time. Her name was Denise Tuohy. She's since passed. But I went to her and I said, can you just do you have any jobs for me? I want to work for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she said, I really could use some help in like payroll and accounts payable. And so I was like, great. Is that an hourly position? And she said, yes. And I said, so if you want to punish me, you're going to make me work overtime. And she looked at me kind of strangely and she said, okay, I think this is something we could work with.
All right.
And I took a huge pay cut, but I was so much happier.
Yeah.
And I started to learn payroll. And then at that time, the payroll office and the human resource office were side by side.
Yep.
Like in a lot of organizations, they're so intertwined. And as employees would come in to talk with human resource about benefits or about anything like that, Denise was noticing how much I would kind of like perk up or go out into the hall and listen to the conversation. Sometimes I would interject and tell them then how their benefits would then show up on their paycheck.
Sure.
And how it was pre-taxed and, all of these things. And she came to me and at one point said, I think you're really more of a people person than you are a numbers person.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
You figured it out.
She figured me out very quickly. And then pretty much started to encourage me to kind of take a look at what human resources was really more about, and really encouraged me to kind of take a look and, is there a way I could do both? And is there a way, could I do benefits administration? And because it's so tied to payroll,
Right.
and really kind of encouraged me to kind of explore both sides, if you will. And and then at some point when Yellowstone Club was going through its bankruptcy, I threw my hat in the ring and said, I'll kind of help do whatever is needed, but I can certainly do payroll and I can do HR.
Okay.
Like I'm learning,
Yeah.
and I'm ready and willing to kind of learn and kind of put my foot, throw my hat in the ring, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's how it came about. And I think I was doing both jobs in 2008. And I kind of feel like I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah. Wow. That's what a great story, though. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which perspective we take, but I think there are a lot of people who have found themselves in a similar position to you, where the demands of the job and the pace of business just chews people up.
It does.
And and then people find themselves with this unexpected opportunity to maybe do something else. And maybe that was the pandemic, I know for many was a pause like that, right? Where
Absolutely.
a lot of people would examine their own lives and their own sense of fulfillment of like, why am I even doing this? Do I even want to go back to that kind of life that I had before everything suddenly paused and I was forced to look at different ways of being, of earning? Luke, what does this story spark for you?
Yeah, no, similar things. I think it's great to hear it from that employee side. And the other thing that I heard was this confusion around hours worked versus outcomes and productivity. And a lot of people have that confusion, right? And a lot of business owners or leaders in organizations have that, because oftentimes they've gotten to the place where they've gotten to because they have been willing to do that. And that's how they've measured their own success, or their past leaders have. So they've usually earned it honestly.
Yes.
And sometimes there is, right? We sometimes we have to put in the hours, but I'm curious kind of your take as now you're coaching founders, owners, leadership teams. How do you encourage them to think about that employee experience when it comes to like, what does performance look like? How do we talk about performance? And how do we untangle that from, well, are you here? I don't see you, so you probably aren't providing
Working.
value, right?
Yeah. If I don't see you and you're at home, you must not be working.
Yes. Yeah. I really think you have to start with trust. Before we went into, this whole pandemic and we all kind of scattered and became, isolated, really. I think we, need to think about did we trust those employees then? If they were in the office, were they productive? Were they working? Were they getting things done? If the answer is yes, then why wouldn't we also think that, they could do that at home? Now, granted, not everyone can, there are too many distractions sometimes in some homes for people to be productive. But I do think most people want to do good. They want to work. They enjoy their work. That is why they're doing it. I mean, like you were saying, a lot of people did make the shift. They did really begin to think and reflect on, is this really what I want to do? Is this really fulfilling me? And, do I really still enjoy this work?
Yeah.
But I would say, getting back to your question, I do think people need, or I should say business owners need to think about that piece of it first, and then put in some metrics. Are there ways that you can, have a basic expectation of what could be done in a day?
Yeah.
What's the bottom line? And then, okay, our overachievers, what's their, what are they achieving or what are they getting done in a daily basis? And then you can start to build some parameters, whether you do that on an individual basis or you start, are there numbers that you can run? Are there, any kind of measurement that you can do to see, just internally in my business? I do have some employees who are exempt and paid on a salary basis. And we do, we're billing our time more or less.
Sure.
So I've asked all of those salary individuals to do job costing. And so they're, more or less clocking in and out with a client multiple times every day. And that's the hardest part for them to remember how to do.
Of course.
But that's a measurement for me.
Right.
I can see, and then we talk about that individually and we celebrate it. And we talk about ways, okay, well, this can be shifted in this way and this is how we can do it. So you really just have to, I think, have those conversations. And one person is more, she's more productive than the others. And that's just, she's been doing HR for 30 some years. So some things are just easier than someone who only has 5 years.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
So she has a different metric than someone else.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, right? Because I think it's tempting to measure everyone by the same measuring stick and expect, well, look at this person. They get this much done. How come you can't? And in fact, you seem to be failing because you're not as productive as this person.
Yes. And I think we get into a dangerous spot when we start comparing our employees to one another. And especially if you verbalize, oh, well, you're not as productive as Joe.
Right.
And especially if it's, if you want to throw in any kind of gender bias in there or anything like that, or age, race, all those things can start to factor in whether you say it or not.
Yeah.
Right.
That individual, if they are different in any way from that other individual, that's the story they're going to make up in their head. And that's the story they're going to tell other people. You don't want to work at that place because they're gender biased or they're,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that is for people who can be more productive, having just here's our base expectation of productivity, or, in your case of utilization or of profitability by customer, or whatever it is, it doesn't provide room for people to innovate, right? Or for those folks who grow over time, someone who's in their first year in a role, like they should be more effective 2 years down the road.
yes.
And so oftentimes I think people just say, well, here's the minimum standard and here's what I expect. And maybe that's you show up for your scheduled hours and that's it, right? And then do the things that are on the list that are there for you. But like that doesn't enable people to progress. And I think, a core human need is progression and growth. So it is challenging. I think this dance that you're describing of measuring outcomes, productivity, but also having an individualized look at things. And I think about then also saying, what's our behavioral standards? Like, what are our values? How do they show up here? And how are we having conversation around that as much as we're having conversations about how many widgets got put in boxes today?
Right. Yes, I totally agree. And I do think while you can still have, let's say when it comes to performance, I think you can still have kind of your company values built into like a set of standards that everyone can, I think, agree to or, have a part of in their performance review.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are some measurements that are more job specific and more individualized because it takes a lot more time.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But just realizing that if it's, or maybe it's just a sliding scale
Yeah.
based on, certain factors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious to go back to at the very beginning, as you were sharing your story, you said you wanted to do things differently. What was your vision in like, I want to help organizations view HR or view their people operations this way? Or, what are the outcomes, since we're talking about outcomes, that you feel like, drive your work every day?
I think because of my experiences in the past, I think that I really wanted HR to be more of a place of a resource. We are human resources. And I really felt as though human resources in most organizations is viewed as the principal's office. I think I've shared this before.
Yeah.
You go there when you're in trouble. That's what happens.
Yeah.
If HR is involved, you're in trouble, you're getting fired, something bad is going to be happening to you. And I think that was my main focus.
Yeah.
Was shifting that, trying to begin to shift that perception. Because I really feel like human resources is there to help. I'm there to help guide you in your benefits. I'm there to help you if you're struggling with how do I approach my manager and asking for a raise? How do I approach this other employee that I really don't get along with and they rub me the wrong way?
Right.
How do I say that they need to stop saying these certain things that offend me? That's really what I wanted human resources to be most of the time.
Yeah. And I know, as you've been doing this over the last, more than 10 years, right? As you were in the field before that as well, that really coincides with this rise of, the HR business partner, right? And throwing around this language and saying HR should be a partner to the leaders in the organization. They should be an asset that helps enable and execute strategy. So lots of organizations have kind of jumped on that bandwagon. Big organizations have completely restructured their HR departments, created HR business partner roles, changed who does what. So I'm curious from your perspective with the clients that you work with, how do you see that? Do you see that mindset shift playing out? Do you see people reaching out to you to say, hey, here's where we're going. How can our people operations, our HR practices, policies help enable our strategy? I'm just curious, like how you experience that trend, because you've been in the thick of it.
Yeah, we are starting to see, people getting curious and wanting to know how to do it differently and doing it better. I do think it's coming. Most of what we see is because it's someone who's younger, who is wanting to, maybe also has not had a great experience,
Right.
and wants to do it a little differently and build a team or, build an organization that has a little bit more people centered. And I think that, there's so many different ways that you can kind of build that into your infrastructure and really put people first.
Because along with that perception that HR is the principal's office, there is a function of HR that has to do with making sure that we're compliant with the law, that we don't break laws, that the business doesn't get itself into trouble by doing something it shouldn't, there's also a balancing act of what the senior leaders want in the business. And then there's this third aspect of what do the employees really need? And sometimes those can all seem to be in conflict with one another.
Absolutely.
And so,
Yes.
I think that's sometimes HR departments get this reputation of just being focused on enforcing the rules because maybe that's the company got forced to put something in place because maybe there had been infractions in the past or they had gotten into trouble or they're just worried about that, right? And so maybe the leadership only sees HR from that perspective, and that's the view that permeates through the organization.
Absolutely.
But I'd love to hear from your experience. How do you balance those seemingly sometimes opposing views or needs?
Yeah. I think the best way for me to answer that is give you a little bit of a case study, a kind of a live story.
Perfect.
I was helping an organization, and they're fairly, I would say, they have over 100 employees, and they already have someone in human resources. So I was kind of her sounding board and helped provide some guidance. And one of the owners was having a very difficult time with one of his lead guys.
Okay.
And he came to us and said, he's producing, he's amazing with his people. His team really loves him. They will kind of, they're doing great work, but I'm this close to letting him go.
Wow.
I can't, we don't communicate well. Every conversation is a struggle. And I really think that we need to let him go and find someone else. We were both kind of like, wait, we're talking about this guy? He's great. And, he's like, I know. And I need your help. So we kind of started putting our thoughts together. We kind of came up with, one of the tools HR has is a performance improvement plan. But when we started to think about it, we were like, but this isn't necessarily boiled down to his performance necessarily. It's communication with his superior. So it kind of boiled down to communication breakdown and their management style differences. So we started to pinpoint those, and then we went to the owner and said, this is what we've come up with, and this is new for us too, but we want to have you both in the room and have an open conversation about the differences and how we can shift and have a better outcome. And it was beautiful. We started out and there was certainly crossed arms. There were some yelling and some cuss words, but that needed to happen. Right. We had to help them move through that conflict, see their differences, see how they were rubbing each other the wrong way, what those push points and hot buttons were, so that it didn't continue.
Yeah.
And I don't think had we not approached it from that angle, I think he would have gotten fired. I think that just would, we had a seat at the table. And it was beautiful the way that it happened. And I think that, I don't know if he's still at the organization. I, of course, would like to think so. But, I think it was a lesson learned for both of them to, okay, if I am feeling a rub, I just need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how you move through it.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable and you don't want to approach it. So you don't.
Right.
I know I say this a lot in a lot of my classes. What you ignore, you tolerate.
Yes. Yeah. We sometimes take it a step further and say what you tolerate is your standard.
Yes.
So then what you ignore then effectively becomes a standard.
Yes.
Because this is how, things continue to progress when they're not being addressed. And then it becomes expected that this is how we behave here. And that becomes a norm. And that becomes then encoded into the culture of the organization.
Absolutely.
And
Because
that's
all
when,
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. And that's how culture happens, whether you're intentional about it or not. And, that's a lot of the work that we do. We call ourselves culture architects because we help leaders recognize what the culture is and the perception. And, because often there's a mismatch between what the senior leadership believes that our culture is, because we have these values and they are on the wall. And yes, these are corporate values, but when those values are not operationalized inside the organization, when they are not perceived to be lived values, and there are things like what you just shared that go and are ignored, norms evolve, and the way we do things is our culture.
Yes.
Right? Not what we say are our values. And so, so that's part of, it being intentional as a leader is to take a look at that, to notice those things. And that's where someone like you or someone like Purpose and Performance Group can sometimes help provide a different look, right? What we say often is it's difficult to read the label from the inside when we're living inside it. We don't see what everyone else sees, right? We're on the inside. So it can be helpful to have someone outside of the organization. And, that's why I love, your approach. You partner with organizations, but you can also come in and provide that sounding board and that outside view to help a leader or a team decipher what's actually happening here and what is causing some of these challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it goes back to what you were saying too about action. Like so often like you said, we say, these are our values and this is what this company believes in and this is our mission. Mm-hmm. And yet our actions portray something totally different. And I sometimes don't think that, obviously if they're the owners and it's not intentional.
Right.
But it's the way that it comes out and it comes across.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why it's so important for us as leaders to be, leading ourselves in that right way first.
Yeah.
To be that example so that others' actions can be, right in the right direction.
Yeah.
And, hitting that target.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's a fact of life that we all have blind spots. Mm. And so, one of the questions that I like to ask leaders sometimes if we're coaching is like, what's the last blind spot that you kind of uncovered or you got someone to tell you about, and how did you address it? And if there's a blank stare, I'm like, well, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm like, well, like they're there. So we probably shouldn't go like 5 years without having some sort of aha about how we're showing up as a leader. Like that needs to be a pretty consistent, cadence.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think, and I don't know if a lot of leaders do this or not. I normally encourage it, but an upward performance review. Mm-hmm. If you have a team, if you are a leader and you want to grow, the best way for you to do that is to have your team evaluate you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it really does show too how much they trust you. Mm-hmm. Are they going to want to come together collectively and have it be anonymous? Or are they going to feel comfortable giving you direct feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Different teams, different styles too. But I do think that hands down, the best reviews I've ever had have come from my team.
Yeah.
Because someone necessarily, if we want to say above me, or someone that I reported up to, is going to have a completely different perspective on the work that I do than the team that I'm working with and leading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know that you do a lot of recruiting, and right now, I'm sure that's a challenging job, but I'm curious, when you talk to someone who says, oh, I've heard about that company, I'm a no. Like, tell me how that conversation typically goes, and what are the things that you see people saying, like right now, as the job market's so tight and really the employee side has a lot of power and negotiating power. What are the things that you're seeing that people are just like, yeah, not really interested in tolerating that or in being a part of that?
I think more what we are seeing, there's two things that come to mind. I think the first thing is if there is any kind of remote or hybrid option, that position will get filled much faster than an in-office 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Or, there's been a really big shift for people to have that flexibility.
Yeah.
Or have that option. And most of them are open to the hybrid. But it is amazing when we post a position that is 100% remote, sometimes we can have 300 candidates in a week.
Wow.
Oh,
And as opposed to if it's hybrid and you're tied to a location, you might get 25.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
a huge difference.
yeah.
Well, and I just do the math and I'm like, well, if I want to interview, let's say if I want someone who's in the top 20 or top 10% talent wise in a candidate pool, I'm probably going to get better talent if I've got a 300 person candidate pool than a 25-person candidate pool.
And or if you can kind of go outside of your area. Because so often, I know we are that way in Big Sky. We're so constrained with our housing and transportation and so many other factors that if you can broaden your horizons and open your talent pool to anyone across the U.S. Who are already happy and situated and don't need any of those things. Yeah.
Well, so that brings up another big, constraint. There are definitely companies that would say, well, sure, I would love that if they could serve tables remotely or do construction remotely.
Yes.
So looking at this community where hospitality and construction are the two really large areas of employment and industries. You can't serve a table from behind a computer screen. You can't build a house or create landscape when you're 300 miles away. So
Right.
there are certainly positions that are difficult or impossible that have to be on location. And what we're seeing across the country in our work, working with some of those industries in other locations as well, those are the industries that are struggling to find people and retain people because there isn't that option. You have to be on location.
Yes. Well, and skilled labor we've seen, I'd say that has been a trend of a decline in individuals who are interested in going into skilled labor and want to do that type of work. And, I don't know if it's, just a shift in the view of education, generally speaking, across the U.S., or is it just, there's just a huge demand.
Right.
And, we can't keep up. So I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah. In our birth rates,
Right.
this is a decades long trend that has started and people are feeling, but I just think if you're a leader listening to this, know that trend is only going to get worse. We know what the workforce that we're producing, by bearing children in the United States, at least, we know the next 20, 30 years is going to be rough. We are not going to have enough people to fill positions. And so I think going back to this, how are we building cultures that really attract and keep people is going to continue to become more and more important. And it has, right? I think it'd be hard to argue that the last 10, 15 years, there hasn't been trending towards, hey, the way we do things here, does it really align with the values that are on the wall? The level of importance there, I think, has gone up, at least with the clients that we talk to, but I think wider. So I don't know. I'm curious your experience of that.
Oh, yes. I definitely think that that's where we're heading. And this is also the first time, I believe, that we've also had 4 generations in the workplace, 4 or 5 sometimes. You know, people are working longer, sometimes just because they can, because they want to. And now we have, young teens, entering the workforce too. So you also have that large span, and, watching them try and, dare I say, get along and communicate, it's always been a struggle. That, this is not something that's new,
Right.
but every generation feels like it's new.
Yes.
Because it's new challenges, and it's, they're just this way. And these people over here, they're just this way. And
The context changes, but the challenges are always the same. And we see that in our work too, working with clients in different industries and across different areas in the country as well. People are people, and the human skills are still the most important skills that are also the most difficult to teach sometimes, right? You can teach technical skills, you can hire people, and if you have good training programs in place or certifications, things like that, most skills are learned on the job, at least most technical skills. But where a lot of the struggles are in the human skills, right? Sometimes we call them the soft skills, and we like to say that the soft stuff is really the hard stuff, right? We call them people skills. I like to think of them as human skills because we work with humans. And I love your desire and passion for bringing the human back into HR, right? And thinking of the HR function as being a resource that serves the people, the humans in the organization, which is a little bit of a different flavor than looking at the humans as resources, as capital, as tools, because that's sometimes what it boils down to for in some organizations. Humans are looked at as tools, as numbers, right? And yes, humans bring tools with them that help the organization grow. But if we reduce the view of people down to numbers and, hours worked or dollars they produce, we struggle to get the outcomes that we actually
figure
really
out how
seek.
to treat humans as humans. We actually get more machine-like outcomes because humans perform more consistently, more productively, more effectively when their needs are met. So if we can understand as leaders, as HR professionals, what are the needs of human beings? How do we serve them most effectively so that they can show up at work and thrive and be their best selves and bring their energy and creativity to work? That's really what engagement is about, right? And we all want higher engagement because there's real numbers that translate. You can see how engagement has greater outcome returns, but you don't get that by focusing on those numbers and those outcomes. You get it by focusing on meeting human needs.
And getting to know them.
Yeah, that's how we know what they need. Like, if we don't know them, right? Yes, there are some universal human needs, like the need for connection and belonging, feeling and being loved. Every human being wants to be loved. We've had another wonderful woman on the podcast, Renee Smith, whose mission, and she has a long background in HR, product development, lots of different things in large organizations and government. And her mission is to eliminate fear in organizations and replace it with love, which is just kind of a radical idea in some ways. And yet at the same time, that's
Human need.
That's a human need, and that's what makes humans do what they do is the need for love and the drive for love and connection and belonging, right? Absolutely. So let's get practical for a moment, Kari. So for those of our listeners who are leaders in an organization, maybe an HR leader, what are some things that a leader can do to be intentional about creating a more human workplace?
I would say the first thing that I realized needed to happen is I needed to get out of my office. I needed to go out and, have face-to-face conversations because they weren't going to come to me. I needed to build a relationship, and they're certainly not going to come to someone that they don't trust, right? They don't know.
Yeah.
And I thought, of course, why would anyone want to come and, into my office if, I wasn't approachable? So, that's kind of where I had to start. I had to kind of get out of my office or if it's, let's say it's a remote environment, being intentional with having kind of like 15, 20-minute conversations with people about them. What are their passions? Where do they want to go? What's their career journey or their path? If you're in kind of construction or skilled labor, go to the job site. Whether it's one-on-one, whether it's group, bring in lunch. Yeah. It doesn't even need to even be that. Just take your own lunch and have it with them.
Right.
Because they need to be able to see that you are also human. Yeah. Yeah. And that you care and that you want to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, and asking once a year doesn't do it.
No.
Right.
On a form.
What's your goal?
Yeah.
Right.
Where do you want to be in 5 years? People barely know where they want to be in 3 months.
Right.
Yeah. And saying, well, I have an open door policy. That it doesn't do it. And I harken back because we have some shared experience doing outdoor adventure, environmental education. And I think about like leading backpacking trips and how many times you have to say, does anyone have a hot spot? Do you feel like you're getting a blister? Right. And you have to say it like 4 or 5 times. Right. And then finally, like after you've had all these breaks, as the leader, you have to keep asking because the earlier you know that someone's boots don't fit or they have the wrong socks or they didn't break in, they didn't have a practice, right? It's a new thing they're doing. The sooner you know and can treat it, the way better experience them and everyone around them is going to have. But, me as a trip leader, I can't just say, now, as we go along the trail, you might start feeling a hot spot. So as soon as you do, just let me know and expect that anyone's going to tell me. Right. They're only going to tell me when I see them limping around and there's, blood seeping through their sock. Right. So I have to ask over and over and over. And I think leading our organizations is the same way. As a leader, like, we have to do the emotional labor and have that level of intentionality to keep checking in on people so we catch whatever those pain points are earlier where we can actually treat them. Oh, you're frustrated with your coworker. Great, let's talk about that before 2 months from now, you're so pissed off that you're like, I'm out of here, I'm not coming back tomorrow. Right? I would much rather know earlier, fix it so that we can all be more productive and get where we're trying to go together.
Yes. And I think as a leader too, at sometimes, especially if you're new into a new leadership role, try not to fall into the trap try not to fall into that pit of someone's coming to you and wanting to kind of vent and kind of air about a fellow and, coworker. Mm-hmm. And then you jump on that bandwagon and start complaining about that individual as well. Mm-hmm. Try and take the high road, listen, try and help them troubleshoot. And even if you have those same feelings and those same frustrations, try and rise above a little bit and be that leader as opposed to joining in. Right. Yeah. I'd learned that.
Yeah. What about from the other perspective? There may be people listening to this conversation who are not a leader of a team. They are part of a team. So from an employee's perspective, if you're stuck in a situation where the leader is not really focused on people, or they have that perception of their HR department that they don't feel necessarily comfortable going there because that seems to be a place where people get in trouble. And I've certainly worked in large organizations where I did not feel comfortable going to HR because I was worried about how it was going to reflect on me if I said something about a leader or another employee. Mm-hmm. So I experienced things, but kept them to myself because I didn't want to either contribute to the problem or get in hot water myself for getting involved with something. And so what advice do you have for people who find themselves in a situation like that?
Oh, we don't get those often, obviously. But when we do, I try and ask if there is anyone else in the organization that they do feel comfortable talking with, that can, and they trust that individual to keep it between the two of them.
Yeah.
But obviously, depending on what it is, because there are certain situations like harassment or bullying that if it's talked to the right individual and they're trained properly, they actually have a duty to act.
Right.
So, there are those circumstances, and if there's not someone in the organization that they do trust or could talk to, maybe there's someone in their community, in their circle, in their family. I would say talking with someone else, at least to kind of explore some options, get a different perspective.
Right.
Is this something that you come up against quite often and you just have a blind side to maybe something that you are doing yourself? You're not sure, you're not aware of it? Or is it something that someone will have some really good insight to, help you through, like, oh, you could try doing this, or, yeah, right, yeah.
Well, this has been a really rich and interesting conversation, Kari, and I really appreciate your perspectives. I appreciate your care for people. I mean, it's very clear and it shines through even in the name of your company, Together, right? We're in this together, and like your care for people, I appreciate that, and your way of working with leaders, right, to help bring people together and bring them in the same room and have the difficult conversations. But my perception is you do it in such a disarming way, and I think it's because people can tell that you care, right? You care about each individual, and so I think that's, for me, been a really great takeaway from this conversation is, how can we see people? How can we see the different perspectives, recognize and honor and validate those perspectives, and help to bring seemingly opposing perspectives together, so people can understand each other better. So I appreciate that, you sharing that. Luke, what are some of your takeaways from the conversation?
I think my biggest takeaway is just like the high ROI of the work that you're doing, Kari. And I think for a lot of leaders, founders, people whose organizations are growing and they need to think about HR differently, I do think it's something people put off too long. And the conversation today is just a great reminder for me that the earlier the better. The payback is pretty quick and pretty significant. The cost to replace an employee on average, about 30% of their annual salary, can be a little bit higher or lower depending on the industry and all of that good stuff. But that's significant expense. And if we can make one intervention a year, right, that keeps someone advancing their career on our team, huge win.
Yeah. Or keeps them from leaving.
Yeah.
Keeps them from even looking around.
Right.
Yeah.
Because believe me, they're looking.
Yeah, they're looking whether we know they are or not.
Exactly. Yes.
Kari, any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners today?
Oh my goodness. Well, just I want to thank you all for, having me, and it's just been a pleasure and a great honor to kind of, I guess, be here and be on this podcast. And I would say, I know I listened to a couple of podcasts that you do, but I had a mentor that I really looked up to. Her name is Riz Higgins.
Oh yeah, I know Riz.
And she was the first person that I remember hearing this. And she always said, get curious instead of furious.
Yeah,
That is always used to be my go-to. Something would happen, an employee would do something, and I would just, are you serious? Like, who does things like that? I really am trying to keep that top of mind.
Yeah.
So that, and it shifts everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another good friend of both of ours who either has been on this podcast before or will be. We have certainly recorded an episode with her, and you'll hear from her, Karen Lum. She says it just slightly different. It's the same sentiment, but she says, get fascinated instead of frustrated, or turn frustration into fascination.
Perfect.
Which fascination has an element of curiosity. It's like, whoa, what is going on here? I wonder what even about yourself, right? Your own reaction.
Yes.
And about someone else, right? Fascinated with their behavior, trying to understand it, get curious about it rather than furious about it. Like, what happened to this person that maybe makes them trigger in that way, right? And try to understand someone rather than dismissing them. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love that. I'm gonna remember that too. Get curious instead of furious.
Yeah.
Love it. All right, that's a great note to end on. Kari, if someone wants to work with you or learn more about your work, how can they find you?
They can find us online. Obviously, we, our website is Together Consulting, and that's a little play on words, so it looks like To Get HR Consulting.
I love it.
And all of our contact details are on our website, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Those are the two places that you can find me pretty active.
Wonderful. All right. Kari, thank you so much for being here today. We loved having you and this conversation. I want to remind our listeners that you can find the reflection guide that Luke shared earlier, conversation guide that you can follow along with these conversations on magicintheroom.com. And you can find us at our website, purposeandperformancegroup.com. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Luke Freeman, Hannah Bratterud, and it is produced by Ben West. Social media management is by Emma Holland and Michael Manfredi. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm, and you can find his music on Apple Music. This episode is recorded on location in Big Sky, Montana. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes of this show and this podcast on magicintheroom.com.